I realized I had lost my son the day he let his wife hand me a list of chores in my own home. It wasn't a dramatic screaming match that broke us apart. It was a Tuesday morning over lukewarm coffee. My name is Lorraine, and I had been a widow for 5 years. When my son David and his wife Sarah asked to move in to save for a down payment, I agreed. I thought it would be nice to have family around. I was completely wrong. Within a month, the dynamic completely shifted. Sarah didn't see me as a host. She saw me as the unpaid help. That Tuesday, she slid a paper across the kitchen island. It detailed the week's cleaning schedule. My name was right next to the bathrooms, the kitchen floors, and the heavy laundry. David sat right next to her, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I picked up the list, folded it neatly, and tossed it into the trash can. "I already cleaned my bathroom," I said, quietly pouring fresh coffee. Sarah's jaw dropped in genuine shock. "We all live here, Lorraine. We need to share the load. David works hard, and I have a stressful job." "And I am retired," I replied, taking a slow sip. "Which means I manage my own space. You two are welcome to manage yours." David finally looked up, looking intensely uncomfortable. "Mom, come on. It's just a few chores. Don't make things difficult for us." I looked at my son. The boy who used to help me weed the garden was now a grown man, terrified of his wife's shadow, willing to let her treat me like a maid. I didn't argue. I just picked up my coffee and walked out to the patio. From that moment, I knew boundaries had to be enforced with iron and silence. I wasn't going to be a victim in my own house. Sarah's attempts to control the environment only escalated as the weeks turned into months. She started rearranging the furniture, throwing away my vintage throw pillows, and replacing them with stark, modern pieces. I didn't complain about the living room. I simply moved my favorite armchair into my master bedroom. But her entitlement soon crossed a line I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, I returned from my walk to find Sarah standing in the middle of my bedroom with a tape measure. She was pointing at my antique oak dresser, muttering to David about how much space it took up. "What are you doing in here?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Sarah spun around, not looking guilty in the slightest. "Oh, Lorraine, we were just thinking. Since we're going to start trying for a baby soon, the master bedroom would make much more sense for us. It has the attached bath. You could easily take the guest room downstairs." David rubbed the back of his neck. "It's just practical, Mom. We need the space." I didn't launch into a speech about how I paid the mortgage. I didn't cry about my late husband's memories tied to this room. I walked over to the door, placed my hand on the knob, and looked at them both. "This is my room," I said. "You will not measure it. You will not plan for it, and you will not enter it again without my permission. Now please, leave." "You're being incredibly selfish." Sarah huffed, her face turning red. "Out!" I repeated, standing firm. They shuffled past me into the hallway. The very next morning, while they were both at work, I went to the local hardware store. I bought a heavy-duty deadbolt lock. I installed it myself on my bedroom door. When they came home, they found the door shut and locked. I kept the only 2 keys on my keychain. It was a quiet, undeniable message. My space was mine, and their access was a privilege, not a right. Would they finally understand? The locks on my door sent a clear message, but Sarah quickly shifted her focus from my physical space to my wallet. She and David had supposedly moved in to save money, but packages arrived at the doorstep daily. Designer shoes, high-end skincare, and expensive gadgets piled up in the living room. Meanwhile, the household expenses were quietly being pushed onto my shoulders. I noticed it when I checked my bank statement. David had a linked card to my primary account, a leftover convenience from his college days. For years, he only used it for emergencies. Now, I was seeing charges for premium meal delivery services and luxury grocery stores. They were treating my retirement savings like their personal piggy bank. I didn't confront them immediately. I didn't demand an apology or an explanation. Instead, I drove straight to the bank. I sat down with the teller and transferred every single dollar of my savings into a brand new account entirely in my name. I then canceled the old joint account, permanently deactivating the card David held in his wallet. That evening, David stormed into the kitchen while I was chopping vegetables for my dinner. His face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Mom, my card was declined at the restaurant. It was humiliating. What happened to the account?" I didn't stop chopping the carrots. "I closed it. You are a married adult with a full-time job. You don't need access to my retirement fund." "We are trying to save," Sarah interjected, marching in behind him. "How are we supposed to build a future if you don't help us? You save by spending your own money carefully, not by spending mine freely," I replied, scraping the carrots into the pan. "This is ridiculous. Families help each other," David muttered, crossing his arms. "I am providing a free roof over your heads," I said, turning to face him. "That is my help. My financial support ends there." I turned back to the stove, leaving them standing in stunned silence. How far would they push? The financial cutoff stung them, but Sarah's entitlement was a deeply rooted habit. She operated under the assumption that because she lived under my roof, my resources were communal property. Since they couldn't access my bank account anymore, they decided to completely ignore their own responsibilities around the house. They stopped buying household supplies, hoping I would cave and stock the pantry myself. I refused to play their game. I bought my own toilet paper, my own laundry detergent, and my own coffee, keeping it all safely locked inside my master bedroom. If they wanted supplies, they had to buy them. But the true test of wills came over the internet bill. The high-speed fiber connection was in my name, and I paid for it monthly. Both David and Sarah worked from home twice a week and streamed movies constantly. When the bill arrived, I placed it on the kitchen counter with a sticky note. "Your half is $60, due by Friday." Friday came and went. I asked David about it on Saturday morning. "Shut Mom, seriously. You're going to nickel and dime us over the Wi-Fi, we're family." He scoffed, not looking up from his laptop. "It's not nickel and dimming. It's paying for what you use," I said. "We're not paying it. You can afford it." Sarah chimed in from the couch. I didn't argue. I didn't remind them of their promises. On Monday morning, while they were setting up their laptops for their remote work meetings, I simply walked to the utility closet. I unplugged the main router, coiled the power cord neatly, and took the entire unit into my locked bedroom. 10 minutes later, loud knocks pounded on my door. "Mom, the internet is down, and I have a presentation," David shouted. "The bill wasn't paid," I called back calmly through the solid wood. "You can set up your own account with the provider." I sat in my comfortable armchair, opened my novel, and read in absolute peace. The internet incident forced David to set up his own account, but the resentment in the house grew thick. Sarah's disdain for me was no longer hidden. It was a constant, daily presence. She would leave her dirty dishes in the sink, drop her muddy shoes in the hallway, and leave her laundry sitting in the machine for days, entirely expecting me to clean up her messes. I simply refused to participate in my own degradation. When she left her dirty dishes in the sink, I carefully picked them up and placed them on her side of the dining table. When her laundry hogged the machine, I placed it wet into a plastic basket and set it outside their bedroom door. The breaking point for Sarah came on a Thursday evening. She had invited 4 of her friends over for a dinner party without telling me. I came downstairs to make a cup of tea, only to find her friends sitting in my living room drinking wine. "Oh, Lorraine," Sarah said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Could you be a dear and bring out the appetizer tray from the fridge? and maybe clear these empty glasses." Her friends looked at me expecting me to nod and scurry away like a hired servant. I walked into the kitchen, poured my hot water, and picked up my mug. I walked back through the living room, looking directly at Sarah. "The appetizers are in the fridge," I said calmly, my voice steady and clear. "You know where the kitchen is. Enjoy your evening, ladies." I walked up the stairs, ignoring the collective gasp from her friends. David cornered me the next morning before work. "You completely embarrassed Sarah in front of her friend's mom. You treated her like garbage." "She asked me to serve her," I replied, not looking up from my newspaper. "I am not her maid. If she wants to host a party, she hosts it." I turned the page, waiting for the explosion. The tension in the house was a stretched rubber band ready to snap. My refusal to be their maid, their bank, or their doormat had pushed David and Sarah to their absolute limits. They couldn't control me, and it drove them frantic. They decided to make one final aggressive push to assert dominance over my life. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on the patio enjoying the breeze when David and Sarah marched outside. David's face was dark, his posture rigid. "We need to talk, Mom. Right now," David demanded, standing over me. "I'm listening," I said, marking my page and closing my book. "This living arrangement isn't working. You're hostile, you're uncooperative, and you're making Sarah miserable," he said, his voice rising. "We want to start a family, and we can't do it with you acting like a dictator. We want you to sign the house over to us. You can take a small apartment downtown." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his demand hang in the air. "You want me to give you my house? It's the right thing to do. You're old. You don't need all this space." Sarah snapped, her eyes narrowing. "We deserve it." "No," I said simply. "This is my home. You are guests who have overstayed your welcome." David's face turned purple with rage. He threw his hands up in the air. "Fine. You want to be a stubborn, bitter old woman? Go ahead. But if you won't help us, you're nothing to me." He leaned in close, his voice dripping with venom. "From now on, you don't exist to me." The words hung in the air. My own son. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but I refused to let him see me break. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I stood up, picked up my book, and walked past them into the house without a single word. The silence I left behind was absolute. He said I didn't exist to him. I decided to grant his wish completely. I didn't wait around to be disrespected further, and I certainly didn't engage in a prolonged, messy argument to get them out of my own house. I chose my own peace. Over the next 2 weeks while they were at work, I quietly organized my exit. I packed my most cherished belongings, my clothes, my books, and the few pieces of furniture that truly mattered to me. I found a beautiful, sunlit apartment in a quiet community 20 miles away, signed a long-term lease, and paid up front. I didn't tell them I was leaving. I simply stopped paying for everything attached to that house. I called the utility companies and canceled the electricity, the water, the gas, and the trash collection, scheduling the final shutoffs for the end of the month. I completely detached my financial life from their physical space. On a quiet Tuesday, exactly like the one where this nightmare began, I loaded the last heavy box into my car. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. I left the property tax paperwork and the home maintenance files on the kitchen island. The house was fully paid off, but the high property taxes, the maintenance, and the new utility setups would be entirely their problem from now on. I placed my house key directly on top of the files. Next to it, I left a single sticky note. "You are the masters of this house now. The bills are yours. I do not exist." I walked out the front door, started my car, and drove away without ever checking my rearview mirror. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a massive, heavy weight lift off my shoulders. I was free. I had given my son exactly what he asked for. Now he would have to survive reality. The 3 years that followed my sudden departure were easily the most peaceful of my entire life. My new apartment was cozy, beautifully decorated, easy to clean, and entirely mine. Nobody left sticky dishes in my sink. Nobody demanded my hard-earned money or my free time. I joined a local gardening club, started taking morning swimming classes, and actively reconnected with friends I had neglected during the stressful years of living with David and Sarah. I completely blocked their phone numbers. I stayed true to my word. I did not exist to them. But the world is small and neighborhood gossip travels incredibly fast. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard updates about the harsh reality they were forced to face. Without my retirement account to drain Sarah's shopping habits, quickly maxed out their credit cards. Without me paying the hefty property taxes and the monthly utility bills, they rapidly fell behind. I heard that Sarah, unwilling to downgrade her luxurious lifestyle, grew increasingly bitter. Their marriage cracked deeply under the intense financial pressure that I was no longer there to quietly absorb. Eventually, they had to sell my old house at a massive loss just to cover their mounting consumer debts. Shortly after the sale, Sarah packed her bags and left David for good. He was left with nothing but the heavy consequences of his own massive entitlement. I listened to these updates with a detached sadness. I genuinely mourned the sweet son I used to have. But I did not regret my actions for a single second. I had successfully protected myself. I had set a necessary boundary and held it firmly. I spent my days reading novels on my sunny balcony, completely detached from the chaos they had aggressively created. I thought I had seen the absolute last of my son. It was a cold, rainy Thursday evening when the past finally caught up to me. I was sitting comfortably in my living room, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the heavy rain streak against the glass patio doors. The tea kettle had just started to whistle in the kitchen when a sharp, desperate knock suddenly echoed through the quiet apartment. I frowned. I wasn't expecting any packages, and my quiet neighbors rarely bothered me this late. I walked to the front door, peering carefully through the small brass peephole. My breath hitched slightly in my throat. It was David. He looked absolutely terrible. The arrogant, demanding man who had viciously banished me from his life 3 years ago was entirely gone. His clothes were soaked through, heavily wrinkled and visibly dirty. His hair was completely unkempt. His shoulders were severely slumped and his face looked incredibly thin and pale. He looked exactly like a man who had lost everything in the world. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and slowly opened the door, deliberately keeping the brass safety chain securely in place. "Mom," he croaked. His voice was trembling, entirely broken. "Mom, please." I stood there looking at his tired face, feeling a complex wave of old memories, but easily maintaining my calm, outward composure. "Hello, David. Mom, I messed up. I messed up so badly." He sobbed, gripping the wet door frame with shaking hands. Sarah left me. The house is completely gone. The money is gone. I lost my job 3 months ago, and I've been sleeping in my car. It broke down yesterday. I have nowhere else to go. I'm hungry. I'm cold. Please, you have to let me stay with you. Please help me." He looked at me with those desperate, begging eyes, entirely expecting the mother he had abused to instantly open her arms, forget the past, and absorb his massive failures once again. He expected the endless rescue he had relied on his entire life. The silence stretched out. David stood in the cold hallway, tears mixing with the rain on his face, waiting for me to unhook the safety chain and welcome him inside. For a brief second, the motherly instinct to comfort him flared in my chest. But then I remembered the chores list. I remembered the locked doors. I remembered him screaming at me on the patio, telling me I was nothing. I reached out and opened the door just a fraction wider, but I did not unhook the chain. I am sorry you are going through a difficult time, David. I said, my voice steady, calm, and entirely devoid of anger. Then let me in, he cried, pressing his hand against the wood. I'll do anything. I'll clean. I'll work. I just need a place to sleep. I looked him directly in the eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. 3 years ago, you stood on my patio and told me that I didn't exist to you, I said softly. You made a choice to erase me from your life because I refused to be your financial cushion and your servant. I was wrong. Sarah made me. No. I interrupted smoothly. You are an adult. You made your own choices. You wanted a life where you were the master and I was gone. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I reached over to a small table near the door and picked up a clear plastic bag. Inside were 2 protein bars, a bottled water, a $20 bill, and a printed list of local job placement agencies and homeless shelters. I slid the bag through the narrow gap in the door. He caught it looking confused. You are a capable man, David. You will figure this out, I said. But you will not figure it out in my home. You told me I didn't exist. You had to live in the reality you created. I closed the door, gently sliding the deadbolt back into place. If there's one thing to take away from Lorraine's journey, it's that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional tolerance. As parents, we are wired to give to protect and to sacrifice. But there comes a point where sacrificing your own peace and dignity isn't helping your adult child, it's just enabling them. Setting firm boundaries isn't an act of cruelty, it's a necessary act of self-respect. Sometimes, stepping back and allowing someone to face the very real consequences of their own choices is the only way they will ever truly grow up. Remember, you are always allowed to protect your own peace, even if it means walking away from the people you love. What did you guys think of Lorraine's final decision? Did she do the right thing by handing David that bag and closing the door? Or would you have handled that moment differently? I'd love to hear your perspective. So please share your thoughts in the comments down below. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to show your support. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more stories like this one. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.